Hello, everybody. Wow, we have a room that is filling very quickly. I so appreciate when everybody arrives on time. Hello, I'm Jen Stojkovic with SF City. This is our remote office setup. Thank you so much for coming out this evening to join us for this really important conversation. We are going to have a jam-packed hour for you. We have some of the best speakers in the industry that are here to join you. So I'm going to do some quick housekeeping notes about the run of show for today, what you can expect for the next hour, and then we'll get right to it. We got some incredible ladies joining us. By the way, is there an opposite to a manel? Because we are an all-female team tonight. Really excited about that. If anybody coins a term for like a womanal, I'm into it. All right, housekeeping. So tonight is going to be divided into 3 15-minute fireside chats. They're then going to be followed by a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can see a Q&A button just down there. You see that bad boy? Please fill it in throughout today's conversation. We are going to be collecting all of the questions as we're talking, and then I will be bringing all 3 of our speakers up, and we will get through as many questions as possible at the very end. So just to reiterate, we will not be doing Q&A after each chat. We will finish all 3 chats and then do the Q&A. Make sense? Okay. This webinar is being recorded. So if you want to share this with your friends, family, or just sit down and rewatch all of these incredible women speak, we will be sending out a link to you after. Lastly, please share your thoughts about today's discussion using the hashtag scaling social impact. You can also see Jackie from the team has sent our hashtag and handle for y'all. You can tag SF City. We are at SFCITI. And of course, you should be tweeting about it because that will be actually our first speaker. So with that being said, it's 5:05. I think we're getting ready to bring up the ladies. So let me welcome to the stage my great friend Sherilyn Adams, Executive Director of Larkin Street Youth Services. Hello. And I'm going to bring up Delana Brand, Vice President of People Experience and Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Twitter. Hello. All right, I'm gonna pop away and I will turn it over to you 2.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jennifer. I am super excited to be here this evening and excited to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. Delana, I had a little chance to look at your history and your bio and read about you before tonight. And you have had an incredible work history across and career across multiple different businesses and companies and corporations, and are clearly a huge leader in the work that you've been doing. And I think we are just super lucky to get these 15 minutes with you. So I want to just start right in and ask you a question about, so what does it mean to you to build a culture around racial equity at Twitter? So talk to me about what that means to you, how you think about that, what you've been doing.
Yeah, it's a powerful question. I think getting to racial equity, and not just at Twitter, I think in any organization, probably requires a few key things. I think first, obviously, in order to do that, you've got to get everybody working together, right? Everybody has got to be on the same page and really focused on ridding any inequities that exist and really committed to advancing inclusion and diversity broadly. One of the things that we do at Twitter is use the hashtag until we all belong. And that's really sort of our rallying cry to bring everybody together. It frames all of our inclusion and diversity work. Reminds us to show up sort of as one team working together to make sure the company is a place where everybody truly belongs and racial equity exists. So I think that connectedness is important. I think secondly, people fundamentally have to both accept and understand that racism exists. And I know that sounds simple in its premise, but there's still a lot of people who challenge that, right? Particularly in sort of a post-Obama era and with many of the progressions that we've had. So accepting that happens, understanding the historical context of racism, and most importantly, in the context of corporations and institutions, that it was intentionally built in many ways, right? So it takes active work to unwind many of those things. And so all of that requires training and re-education. And I intentionally call it re-education because I think in many ways our traditional education systems have probably failed to truly educate us on the history of racism in this country. And so at Twitter, we focus on a lot of training. And in particular, one of the things that we're exploring right now is targeted anti-racism training and building that into our training curriculum, again, to try to unwind some of those things. And then I think the third thing is people getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And another one that sounds really simple, but not really easy to do. So many people can't get to a place where they're willing to open themselves up and have real conversations because it either makes them uncomfortable or maybe they feel guilty. And so they're not willing to engage in conversations that can lead to reconciliation and remediation. And both are required for racial equity to actually exist. And so again, at Twitter, we're trying to break down those barriers through conversation series. We recently had Dr. Ibram Kendi come in as an example, who had a conversation very targeted with our tweets around like how to show up as an anti-racist and what that looks like from a behavior perspective, so people could have that sort of top of mind. And that was very powerful for many of our tweets. So I think, again, active, collective work together, education, and then just creating space for people to learn to be uncomfortable and it be okay.
Wow. Yeah, that is three amazing pillars of work, right? When I think about sort of each of those things, anti-racism work, really naming that racism exists, really creating the space for folks to be uncomfortable, and then offering a different sort of lots of different education and training around that. So I'm wondering, as you how do you think about who comes to the table to sort of help plan and think about that? Is your both before going fully remote and post or in remote and whatever will come after? How do you think about, how do you design those trainings? How do you get folks to buy in to the trainings? What do those actually look like? Can you give us some examples so that people can start to get a feel for that? And how they could, what does it take to bring that into a place of work?
Yeah, it's collective effort. So a lot of the work obviously is driven by my inclusion and diversity team, the people team broadly in particular. When you look at sort of training, we have a wonderful career experience team that does a phenomenal job building and scaling trainings, and we work in partnership and collaboration with them. But then some of this stuff, and in terms of ideas, come directly from the business themselves. And that's why I think that collaboration and getting everybody connected and on the same page is so important, because ideas can come from anywhere. And them identifying what needs they have or what they think is a challenge within their organizations. And then everybody sort of coming together, and like that's our staff, our leadership teams, the people team that has a core accountability here. And then other sort of diversity champions throughout the organization, who people are just interested in this work, working together to build and scale the programs.
And as you think about what the environment will look like going forward, right? So we talked a little bit before we got online that you've done some work prior to the going remote because of COVID-19. Maybe Twitter had been thinking about that for a bit. How do you think about continuing to champion racial equity as you decide how the company will sort of operate fully remotely? Does it change how you do the work? How will you think about the work going forward?
Yeah, so and this is what you're referencing in terms of that I shared with you, and I would love to share it also with the folks listening. In terms of our remote work, to be clear, we had been on this path of decentralization and remote work for 2 years in particular. Since 2018, we had sort of organizational-wide goals and objectives to focus on this. And part of that is for diversity purposes, right? To get access to more diverse talent pools, et cetera, in addition to obviously the business imperative around distributive offices. So we were already on this path. And so a lot of the systems and structures and things that we had in place helped us during this time period. So you talk about like, how do you keep people connected and included, et cetera. We've been trying to do these things. We've got, for instance, for our remote tweets, as we call our employees at Twitter, we actually have an HR sort of business partner and a team that is dedicated to supporting them and making sure that they stay connected and involved in the work and everything that we do. They're a part of and understand, obviously using technology like Slack and other things to make real-time conversations sort of come to life. And so all that's in place. And so when you get in a period like this, it becomes easier to keep the connections going and to make people still feel included and a part of the process, which is critically important. I think that, some of the principles that we outlined in terms of when COVID happened and we went into sort of full shelter in place mode, et cetera, we actually outlined in our May quarterly inclusion and diversity blog. And so I encourage people that really want to get tactical and in the weeds around what we did to go and take a look at that. That's at blog.twitter.com. And everything that we sort of did in terms of actions and the principles that we use, which were to put people first, front and center in the work, to make sure our leaders, managers in particular, were leading with empathy and flexibility, making sure that we were creating space for allyship and continuing to cultivate that. And then obviously continuing to double down and support our business resource groups. And those are the various communities within Twitter that are represented. And a lot of them in terms of people of color, you can imagine we're disproportionately impacted by COVID and now even recently with some of the things that are happening in the organization. So it was very critical for us to stay deeply connected with them and making sure that they felt supported during this process.
Sorry, I had gone on mute. I almost forgot to come off mute because my daughter is like running behind me. So I didn't want to distract that. I'm curious about, I want to push a little bit on how you think about continuing, racial equity work, anti-racism work, having those uncomfortable conversations, finding ways for white folks to have those uncomfortable conversations, creating allyship is so much about connection and relationship and trust building.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I guess I want to push a little bit more for your sort of thinking about in some sort of remote world or hybrid model of remote work. How are you thinking about continuing to build that trust and that work together, those ally work, whether that's allyships, whether that's creating space, I guess, for folks to have those uncomfortable conversations? Are there things you're thinking about in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks and feels different in terms of how you're doing that. Like it's virtual, so it's using the technology that we're using right now as opposed to in classroom sessions and settings. But the point is, are you creating space for those conversations? Are you building programs that actually have that content and allow people to get to that level of learning and connection? We even do our all company, what we call all hands meetings now virtually. And this is globally 5,000 employees together. We actually had one just this week that was focused solely on inclusion and diversity. So reminding people of the journey that we're on, all the work that we had done previously prior to this environment. And then now, given the environment, here's all the new sets of priorities and actions and programs that we are going to either build or that are already in flight for the balance of this year. Like, and again, getting people, so that's what I mean when I say getting people on the same page, like giving them real concrete actions that you're going to take and sharing that with them. So that doesn't look any different whether we were actually in the offices and I'm on stage actually having that conversation with the organization, or I'm sitting in my home office as I am now sharing that. The point is we are intentional about making sure that we have those connections and we have those trains and we have those opportunities. The other thing I'll share with you is, because you talk about sort of these communities and groups and making sure that they feel connected. Our inclusion and diversity team does a phenomenal job of helping to facilitate ongoing conversations with each one of the business resource groups that we have, and we have 9. They have sort of monthly meetings with their groups in the communities. They have their own all hands where they're sharing information, the plans, the work, etc. So all that has continued. Nothing has really changed there. So I don't want to oversimplify it and not say that there aren't some challenges, but we believe fundamentally that just the processes with which the work changes, but not the work itself.
So what I'm hearing is the sort of deep connection to the work across all levels and the deep investment and resourcing of the work.
Absolutely.
So I have 2 questions maybe, and I know we're getting close to time, but one would be tips or strategies or lessons to share with folks who might be in an earlier stage of the work within a company. So lessons you've learned, or the key thing that folks should think about as they're trying to embed racial equity into the culture of their organ, or do the racial equity work. And maybe in particular, if folks don't have a you, right? So, you know, as you have walked in different places, what are the ways, what are the tips or tools to get the work going in companies that might be in a different stage of the work than Twitter?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love that you asked that, because it calls out one of the problems that I have in a lot of organizations with inclusion and diversity work. Because I believe firmly that in an ideal world, if we were all showing up and doing this work the right way, I wouldn't exist. My role wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be necessary. It wouldn't be needed. And you don't need a dedicated I&D team to do this work. In fact, like I say, where a lot of companies go wrong is they default to that and think that I&D, me, or anyone in any other organization can completely control this, when so much of feeling included gets down to individual connections, as we're talking about. So how is your manager showing up, and how are they leading or not inclusively? Like, your I&D head can't fix that and can't do that. So most I&D teams that don't operate with sort of the right framework, they actually have no real power to influence or control the environment. So I think in order for an organization to truly be successful at this, that it has to be embedded in every fabric of the organization, from the culture to the systems to the processes, programs, policies, tools, all that sort of stuff, end to end. That's how we approach the work at Twitter. And we were just talking about sort of like ideas coming in from the business and working collectively, et cetera. That's the core premise of why we approach the work that way. The uniqueness of my role at Twitter is that I'm not just sort of head of I&D, I also am vice president of people experience, and that's a whole collection of functions within the people team, like compensation, benefits, analytics, policy, et cetera. So I have the ability real time to think about, from a comp perspective, pay equity, right? I'm infusing I&D into all of our other core processes in the organization. And so even absent having a person like me, I would encourage people to think about where there are gaps in their organization and going to the teams that actually have control of those processes and trying to partner and work with them. So you can go to your procurement team, for instance, and say, hey, do we have a supplier diversity program? Because I think we should need one, and volunteer to participate in that.
Yeah.
You can go to your people organization and say, hey, we don't have business resource groups or employee resource groups. I'd love to start one or start a couple and get people to join me. Like, so just figuring out where the work needs to happen in that respective organization, being the change that you want to see in the world. To do it. Exactly.
All right. Well, I could talk to you all day and all night. This has been a great 15-minute fireside chat. I love ending with be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you so much. You will be back for Q&A at the end of the evening. Thank you for your time and wisdom.
Thank you.
Oh.
Uh,
Hi. Oh, sorry. I blew my roll. I'm so excited to bring on the next speaker. So Lisa, I'm going to let you take it from here because I totally messed up. Lisa, you're up.
Wait, Lisa, we can't hear you. Unless it's just me. It could be me.
We can't hear Lisa.
Now?
Okay.
There we go.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Sherilyn and Delana. So great to hear from you. My name is Lisa Countryman-Kuros. I'm the CEO of JBS in San Francisco, and I have the distinct pleasure of talking today with Julie Wina, who is the Community Counsel and Acting Regional Counsel for Africa Airbnb. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
It's great to be with you. And Julie, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about your just distinguished career in the Obama administration, your work as a lawyer, and I was thinking about something that I heard W. Kamau Bell say recently, which was that protesting is really, really critical, but in order for real and lasting change to happen, people have to get excited about paperwork. And as a lawyer, paperwork is a big, big part of your job.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it means, and I know that paperwork is part of this, to build racial equity into a product?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you to the SF City team for having me. I'm honored to be part of this dialogue, very important dialogue, and this very pivotal moment in history. Yes, it's so funny with legal paperwork. Yeah, is certainly a thing for sure. You know, Lisa, when I think of racial equity in product policy or process development, I think of, I think about the intentions that we're meeting the policy or the product change with, right? Are we trying to optimize, up-level, enhance, create a better user experience for our community? But unfortunately, sometimes unintended rather, consequences can happen, and an adverse impact can happen to user communities within a slew of industries. At Airbnb, we were beginning to hear about experiences within the community where people from underrepresented backgrounds were having different experiences on the platform, some that were absolutely, and most that were absolutely incongruent with our mission, right? Our mission is, how do we create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, and any behavior that is incongruent with that, we won't tolerate it on our platform. To that end, we've created many interventions in our product and in our policies in an effort to reduce discrimination and to mitigate bias. This work was led by an amazing product team. I have some of the best, I don't know if I want to say clients, they're just the great partners and friends that I've worked with in some time. And our amazing anti-discrimination product team, which is led by Ann Diaz, is a team that really punches above their weight. It's a team comprised of data scientists, designers, engineers, researchers, just a really amazing, phenomenal team, again, that punches above their weight. In 2016, we launched our community commitment, and it essentially was a forced product function that you had to click accept or deny. And it was a sentence that said, or a small paragraph that essentially said, I agree to treat anyone on Airbnb's platform without judgment, bias, independent of religion, race, all of these things. And it was very important to us that you either accepted it and we kept you on the platform, or if you denied it, we removed you from the platform. We lost 1.3 million users with that prompt. And it was something that was very, very important to our leadership, to our founders, and to our teams. We were very serious about it. That later led to more product interventions. In 2017, we implemented Instant Book, which is essentially a feature that allows people to instantly book without prior approval. Sometimes we know that the way that prejudice arises is based on preconceived notions around how people see one another. So we felt Instant Book was a way to also reduce bias. That then led us to another intervention in late 2018 early 2019 when we created a change around our profile photos policy. You know, we made this global change so that when you are now entering the booking process as a guest, your host at your listing cannot see your profile photo until the booking is accepted. Again, an effort for us to reduce and mitigate bias on the platform. Lighthouse is our latest project in doing that, and it's an important step in our continued fight around discrimination, understanding it when and how it happens. It's being launched in the United States solely at this point in time, and it's essentially used to uncover, measure, and overcome discrimination during the booking process. I will say our team was very intentional with how we wanted to create Lighthouse. We consulted many external organizations, civil rights and privacy organizations. It was very critical to us that we took our time to develop this. I've been working on it for a couple of years now. And we've also made that methodology available to other companies who are also wanting to embark on that fight against discrimination.
That's really impressive work, and so exciting to see, you know, all of these teams, engineering, legal counsel, all working together to create these systematic fixes to very, very serious challenges. And at a click, maybe a couple of clicks deeper than engineering work, you know, people talk about recent events, but, you know, really what we're talking about are the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. Yeah. I would like to know how have those recent events affected you as you think about racial equity at work and your colleagues? Yeah,
no, I mean, you know, 2020, I mean, quite a tornado, right? First, you know, we were all met with the pandemic, right? It's like the world is on fire. We were met with a global pandemic that forced everyone into their houses, into isolation, that made them, and a lot of folks isolating by themselves, which can take a toll mentally. You know, I think the pandemic alone has forced many of us to confront ourselves in real ways that we hadn't before, because we're used to the monotonous ritual of getting up, getting on the ferry, getting in your car, you know, going to work, going through the motions. But it made us still. But then you layer that with the issues the Black community is facing, has been facing for 401 years in this country. And, you know, after watching George Floyd being murdered, I cried and was distraught. And, you know, I remembered the parts of this country that doesn't see me and other people as equals. But I also remembered the immense amount of privilege I have in being an attorney and being able to have access to tools and knowledge that can help lift people who are at the margins. And you know, it's the whole adage, to whom much is given, much is required, or much is demanded. So I felt this sense of, you need to be even more committed to this work, because God has blessed you with an opportunity and a unique skill set to help people. So you have a responsibility first and foremost. You know, Lisa, if I can, I'm just gonna give you just a quick story. After George Floyd was killed, I live in downtown Oakland. After George Floyd was killed, I needed to go to the post office, not immediately, but a week later, I needed to go to the post office. But there were protests that had happened in downtown Oakland. And unfortunately, an officer was killed during the protest. And I stayed right across the street from the federal building. And, you know, I was so scared to go to the post office, which is just a 2-block walk. And I had to think through, okay, how do you dress? What do you wear? Can't wear jeans, can't wear basketball shorts. Do you put on makeup? What does your hair look like? How will you carry the package? Is it in a bag? Like, I went through this risk calculus on how to get to the post office, which is in my neighborhood that I've lived in for years, because I was afraid. You know, there was an amazing woman who heard me share this concern, and she drove from Los Altos, not knowing me. She drove an hour to walk me 5 minutes to go to the post office. And in that moment, I was reminded of two things, you know, the beauty that the human spirit is still beautiful. There are people out there who want to love on you and support you and help you. But then I also had to sit with what type of trauma am I going through that I had to go through an analysis on what to wear, as if, and I thought it was normal for me to think through how I show up outside, you know. So I say all that to say I feel even more committed to this work, you know, around, you know, at work, my colleagues have been absolutely phenomenal. You know, I've just received so much support. You know, my manager, you know, he has held space for me. You know, our chief legal officer has held space for me. Our whole legal leadership team across the globe, not just in the US, are reaching out, from EMEA, the Africa team I work with, all of my clients. They were like, are you okay? Do you need anything? Our deputy in the Asia region, APAC region, was doing the same. So I just felt an immense amount of love, and I felt very covered. And I think other people felt that way as well. You know, our Black employee resource group at Airbnb, which I had the privilege to serve as the global lead in the past, they are just doing phenomenal work and created an allyship guide that anyone can access if people are trying to figure out what's the best way I can be an ally. They've created that work. We also have a Christians affinity group that I'm part of, and that group they are the first group I cried to on a Zoom call, and they've just held so much space for me. So I'm incredibly grateful. I was personally affected in having a childhood friend who was very close with Floyd. So being able to hold space for her as she's figuring it out, and as she's trying to understand it in real time with the world, it lands differently for her. So trying to be there for her where I can. And, you know, I'm just incredibly grateful for colleagues. And I'm hoping that this allows people to be recommitted to the work of promoting equity, really, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We are so close on time here. I have two more questions for you. I really want to get to both of them. The first has to do with your advice to people at other companies that want to make products that are mindful of the potential for discrimination and racial disparities. And then lastly, I'd also love to hear from you how your organization is taking action and the kinds of other organizations you're supporting.
Yeah, so I think there are three things companies can do to promote equity within their product policy and processes development. One is, you know, you got to do the inner work, right? I can't heal others unless I heal myself. So how do you look within? You know, how do you think through, as we were building this out, who was around the table as we're building this product? You know, I will say our former chief operating officer, Belinda Johnson, when she created the anti-discrimination task force within Airbnb, I think back in 2016, she was very focused on making sure many people were represented around that table. And I think that is one, you know, first, I think it's important to make sure you have folks who are oftentimes left at the margin, part of that dialogue. Secondly, not only bring them in there into the room, but really make sure that they are embedded into the process in a very real way, not in a performative way, but in a very real way, which again, our team did, and made sure people were part of that process. For me personally, when I started at Airbnb, our then general counsel, Rob Chestnut, he empowered me. You know, he really empowered me, and so does our current chief legal officer, Rich Bear. You know, they've empowered me to lead on some of the issues that we do at Airbnb on the civil liberties legal side. So I think that empowerment from leadership is very important. And then finally, third, don't be afraid to consult outside partners. You know, it's okay to say you don't know a thing. You're not going to be the expert on everything. You know, bringing in partners to be part of that development process, I think, is critical. We received a ton of feedback when we were consulting on Project Lighthouse, you know, thinking through what civil rights and privacy organizations need to be involved. We consulted with Color of Change. I mean, they are our main partner, and they have been at the forefront of these issues. And we consulted with other organizations such as LULAC, Asian Americans Advancing Justice. It was just so critical to have diverse perspectives at the table in building. You know, my good friend Adam Tongsavat always says, you know, perfection is the enemy of progress. You know, you just, you know, and you typically hear perfection is the enemy of good, but I like progress because it shows that I'm still moving, I'm still continuing to go and iterate and make this thing better. And, but as long as, ultimately we're all marching in the right way towards equity for all and bringing more people to the table, it only makes what you're doing it makes it better, and you can approach it with greater ease. To your second question around what organizations we're supporting, Airbnb has been incredibly supportive of Black Lives Matter and the NAACP, and has donated money and is supporting the work of those organizations. In the legal department, I'm super fortunate to help lead our pro bono efforts. And one organization that we're working with that I'm super excited to work with is the Tahereh Justice Center. They're a national nonprofit organization that has served over 25,000 courageous individuals who are fleeing violence since 1997. They work with human trafficked survivors, immigrants, primarily women and girls. And that work has been so critical and so impactful. And for me personally, immigration issues are important as a child of immigrants, as someone who has seen a parent deported by ICE. Like, those issues are incredibly important to me. And I'm so happy that Airbnb is doing that work. And we're going to be expanding our pro bono efforts to do even more in the civil liberties space.
That's great. That's great. Julie, thank you so much for sharing your stories, personal and professional, and your experience. And I know I'm getting messages that I'm over time. I am going to turn the mic over to Jennifer Stojkovic and Kimberly Bryant.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Julie.
Hello again. Hello, hello. Kimberly, if you would like to join me on our virtual stage. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Jennifer? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Those glasses are phenomenal. I dig it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I could not think of a better time for us to be having this chat for a number of reasons, but in particular, that insane Silicon Valley report that came out today. Did you hear about this?
I didn't. I've been in meetings all day, so I missed it.
Listen to this. 10 large Bay Area tech companies employ 0 Black women. New survey finds. How did we get here? Maybe this is a good jump. Black Girls Code.
Yeah. I'm not too surprised about that. I think I did see someone post about that either early this morning or maybe it was yesterday, late afternoon. And that doesn't really surprise me. This is going on 10 years for Black Girls Code. And when we started, we certainly knew that there was an issue in tech diversity, and no one was talking about that issue, which was the lack of women and certainly the lack of people of color, and particularly women in tech positions and most of the major tech industries and companies. We started to see some change and work in that area probably around 2013 when those first DEI reports started to be released and made public. And we saw a shift of focus in both resources and attention and internally with tech companies to address those issues in many ways, multitude of ways. But some of the data that has been really coming to light over the last couple of years, probably since late 2018, early 2019, has shown that in many cases, representation has decreased over the last 5 or 4 years, particularly for Black women. So that report does not surprise me. What I know, even in my own personal circles, is that there certainly has been a lack of retention of Black talent, especially women, in many of those companies. That's a huge issue. That's something that hasn't been talked about much, but even if we get women of color in these seats, they don't tend to stay long for a variety of reasons, including an inequitable path to career development, hostile work environment, etc. So I'm disheartened, but not too surprised by those numbers and by that report.
Yeah, that's, generally what we have been hearing. There's a lot of turnover, a lot of people, they just don't feel like they can, stay in this environment for whatever reason. I know this might be a little bit off script of what kind of Black Girls Code does, but like how can we create an environment that is more hospitable for that?
Well, I feel like from the beginning of when SF Cities first began, and in the early days, and some of the conversations that I would have with Alex, I would basically say that I don't think that the industry will really change and become more hospitable to a diverse workforce until there are more diverse leaders of those organizations. And so I think this is a long game that we're playing. And I think, 10 years in, we see that most of the folks at the top that are leading the most well-capitalized tech companies, those leaderships, even from the board on down, still lack diversity. And as a result, I think what we see is a systemic issue that happens within a company when the culture is driven by really non-diverse work teams. So I think for me, and looking at the problems that we're addressing, I don't think they can change until there are more diverse leadership. There's more women in positions of authority. There's more women of color in positions of authority leading these companies, their companies being funded, them being able to create those companies until we really see a real cultural shift.
So do you think that the solution is a policy solution? There's reporting on the percent of like female board members, right, with California. Or are we talking more of like a company way forward, or is it kind of just like a mix of both, maybe legislators and private entities?
I think it is a mix of both. I think one of the things that I've been, kind of shining a light on, which was a very symbolic but also a really tangible move in the tech space recently, was when Alexis Ohanian gave up his board seat on Reddit. And in a few interviews, I mentioned that, BGC, and Alexis is a friend of BGC. He's definitely been a supporter and an advocate for a very long time. So when I first saw that news, I was like, I'm not sure. Like, we need him in the boardroom, and I'm not sure about this move. Although, yeah, I wasn't sure. Yeah. Then I heard him do an interview, or read an interview that he gave, where he talked about the reason he stepped down was because he wanted that to be a symbolic statement of actually giving up his seat so that someone else could take it. And then immediately, like, I got it. I was like, you're absolutely right. Because I think that it will take not just some shifting of chairs. Some folks have to give up some power. Some seats need to be given up so that others can take those positions of leadership for real change to occur. So I think part of that is policy from the outside, but I think there's also some internal reconstructing of those spaces that needs to occur within those companies likewise.
It's almost like what we're seeing with political parties right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing. And I think, like, for me, I have always approached my work from an intersectional lens. So I am a Black woman working in spaces that have traditionally lacked gender equity as well as racial equity. And so for me, and when I look at all of these various changes and shifts across a variety of spectrums, I see that there needs to be more women and more women of color in positions of authority in every single industry, in every single space, to really drive this transformation that we're seeing across the world.
Yeah, I was on a call with a VC earlier today, and we were talking about just how many women don't even get to their door. They just don't even make it to that first, even trying to raise a round. And, she said, all of the white male founders come in and they say, yeah, I've done like a friends and family round. And she goes, how much was that? Like a couple $100,000, 750,000. And it's like, who are your friends and family, you know? And so like, how are women, especially women that are coming from different socioeconomic, you know, places, how are they even supposed to compete with something like that?
Right. I think when we talk about, you know, a level playing field, I think is clear, and especially in examples like that, that we're not dealing with a level playing field. Like the cards are stacked against us when we come into the field. Like we come onto the field, team's already on base. So I mean, might already be on third base. So it's a game of like, how can you realign these centuries, you know, you talk about people, you're talking about centuries of inequity. And then when you talk about women starting their own businesses, you know, there's decades of inequity before we even got the right to vote. Like you never mentioned, like start our own business, VC funded business. So I think like we really need to look deeply at in these cases around the systemic barriers that have been built into all of these systems that create these inequities, so that even folks that have the skills, capabilities, ideas, etc., can't even get a chance, a shot, because the playing field is not only unlevel, it's stacked against them.
Yeah. Just a quick reminder to everyone, in a few minutes we'll go to Q&A, so if you want to get your question in, get it in now. So Kimberly, there's so many things that we need to fix right now. We've got to like do the entire bloody thing, and none of us are even in person right now, right? And so we have people tuning in from all over, a lot of people in the tech industry, probably primarily the tech industry, and they're probably going like, hell yeah, like we need to do this. What can you do? What can you do in front of your MacBook? What do you want to tell the attendees to do to support your work and to support kind of like building what this new system could look like?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many things that one can do. I think some of my fellow panelists have certainly leaned into some of those things. I think that everyone can do something. So I think if you can't give of your time, give of your resources and your dollars, give of your expertise to others so that you can mentor someone that is going up to pitch their company. If you are in a position of authority, a position of power, think about ways to tangibly, you know, make change internal to your organization. In the case of Alexis, it was stepping down and giving up his board seat so that a more diverse demographic of board member could take that space. I think everyone has something that they can do, you know, if it's not tangibly giving of their time and their resources, their treasure, so to speak, as we say. Everyone has something that they can do. I think one of the things that I was just thinking about this afternoon as I was in discussion about some of the changes that have been happening in the environment currently, it struck me in the conversation that I was speaking to someone that does similar work, but not really to BGC. I say similar from the framework of they do work in the racial, social justice, criminal justice space. And I was sharing some of my experience and some of the outpouring of support that we've gotten in this moment. And even this person who I consider a comrade in the work, kind of felt like, well, how do you feel about that? Because, you know, you really don't do this work. And I was like, oh, no, we do, you know, because I want you to understand that just because we don't do, for example, bail reform, that does not mean that the work that an organization like Black Girls Code or an organization like Code 2040, an organization like the Human Utility Project, Hidden Genius Project, we do work that has a foundation of equity, social justice, racial equity. That's a cornerstone of our work. We couldn't do our work if we weren't informed by those issues that impact our community and communities that are disadvantaged and hit the hardest by this uneven playing field. So we can't not support those organizations. So while I was certainly heartened, if you will, to see so many of the tech companies that were donating to racial and social justice, criminal justice organizations with very large 6- and 7-figure checks, it struck me in a certain way when I spoke to a colleague or peer of mine that runs another organization, and she mentioned that I'm only getting support at like $10,000, $20,000. Like, are you serious? And this is what, and you're writing a 7-figure check over here. We can't create change in an ecosystem that way, because it's not even logical that you would address issues external to your company and not turn a mirror in and systemically look at how you impact those same issues within your industry, within your company. You have to do that. You know, the report just showed there's 10 large companies, they don't have a Black woman that work in them in the tech space. But you're donating out here. No, that's part of that donation, and those resources need to address those issues right in your own company at the same level or some percentage of it, because we need a multivariate response to really create lasting and sustainable systemic change. So for me, that's a long-winded way of saying that I'm very happy that these tech companies and CEOs are interested in having a conversation about racial and social justice. But I'm also looking for them to step up to the plate and support these social justice, technology driven and led companies that are really working right here within the tech industry and doing this work every day as a cornerstone of the other things that we do also.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like what Delana said earlier, like in a perfect world, her job shouldn't have to exist, right? Like if we're doing it the correct way, there shouldn't have to be this person that's there to hold the flag and go, wait a second, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, and we're here for a reason. So if to Delana's point, like if there was no issue around diversity and inclusion within the industry, those jobs wouldn't be necessary, but they are, which says that there's still more work to do to get our own house in order internally, and then hopefully be a beacon to light the world, because tech is important. I think one of the things that really struck me in the last panel was just how impacted communities were by COVID. And if any time we are all sure that technology is an important facet of our lives each and every day, is now, because we are locked behind these doors. We can't go outside. My daughter's over here in another room right now on a computer. I can barely get bandwidth in here, but we're lucky. I consider myself privileged because we have devices. I can log on to broadband and get access. There's certainly part of the communities that don't have those things. And so when we interrogate what the role that tech plays in that way, it's certainly evident that tech and equity and racial justice, they go hand in hand. And tech has never been more important to this conversation around systemic change and equity, racial equity is really key to the foundation of the work that we do. And so it's important to make sure that we support and grow this in the ecosystem as well as externally.
Well said. Well, why don't we bring up Delana and Julie back up? Can we get you guys popping back up? Hello, hello. All right. Now that I have all of you ladies, we've got some great questions that have come through that I'd love to spend a few minutes if you guys got a few. All right, let's do it. Maybe we'll start with you, Delana, actually. In this pandemic, do you see an increase in job growth and diversity and inclusion roles?
Yeah, I think even prior to the pandemic, right? And it's what we were sort of just talking about. There are still a lot of internal issues and systemic racial inequity challenges that organizations and institutions across the board have. So until we can fix those, inherently, you're going to have to need people inside to solution and to work on those. And again, I just will reinforce that as organizations are thinking about inclusion and diversity and adding those resources, I would encourage them to look end to end and not just sort of standalone I&D to stand up programs, but thinking about how the company truly operates and making sure that I&D is a lens built into everything that they're doing.
And I'll turn this question out to everyone, and maybe we'll start with you, Delana. is there any particular company you've seen that's done a really good job of this that you would recommend folks take a look at? And then maybe we'll go to you, Julie, and you, Kimberly.
No, I think it's a continuum, right? And so I think about this as a journey, and there are different companies that are different places along the journey, and different places that have gotten some parts of it right or better than the others, but no one has cracked this nut. From a societal perspective, we haven't cracked this nut, right? And so you got to think about your companies and organizations as just a microcosm of what exists in society. So we have a long way to go.
Okay. Is there anything, perhaps kind of pivoting the question a little bit to you, Julie, and then you, Kimberly, is there any really interesting work that you've seen as you were building your products with Airbnb where people were doing kind of really impactful work with their company that was addressing this kind of issue?
Yeah, I think to Delana's point, I mean, she's absolutely correct. We haven't grappled with this as a society yet. I mean, we have some examples. You look at South Africa and a ton of things that were done around reconciliation there, but I think there are some challenges certainly in front of us. I was going to speak to, I'll wait for this question, but I was going to speak to the product around the disabled community, but I will wait to speak to that question.
Okay. Anything, Kimberly?
I agree with Delana and Julie on this one. I had this question on another panel or discussion I had before, and they were like, is any conflict? I was like, no. But there's a continuum. Like, some companies are good at different things and have really made some advances in certain areas, but I think we still have a lot of work to do overall. One of the companies that I do like, one of the things that, and this is not really recent now, but when Salesforce went back in to level set all of the salaries for the women in their organization, I was like, yes. I thought that was really a bold move. I think that made a statement and also made some real differences for such a large workforce to do something at that level, at scale. I would love to see more of that type of thing. When someone asked about, there's a question that I actually saw in the chat about pay transparency and equity, but I think that when Salesforce made that announcement and went back and really level set the salaries and investigated how women were being paid, that is one great example of how to re-level some of the playing field.
And Delana, specifically for you, they're curious about your thoughts around pay transparency as a way to achieve equity.
Yeah, let me first just say this is not a if, it's a when, because you can think about sort of there's not even just internal pressures within organizations, but externally there's more and more disclosure requirements that happen, particularly for global companies, where I think in like EMEA in particular, there are a lot more activists around some of these things. So that is a reality that is coming. And I think more and more companies are starting to think about how they accelerate the progress. I think, most compensation professionals agree that transparency is one of the first things that we need to do to sort of level set and to get to parity and equity. Most of the challenges, however, are not around the internal impact. It actually is what happens externally, because compensation and your salary ranges and those things are also a source of competitive information. And I think that's the piece that they haven't yet figured out, and why, if we can get to fundamentally some legislation around this where everybody is forced to do it at the same time, I think it takes that fear or concern sort of away from who wants to be first, if you will. And that those are really conversations, but no question that this is coming. This is also a continuum. There are different companies that have different levels of transparency around these things. In addition to transparency around pay, I just want to say that transparency from an inclusion and diversity perspective should be paramount to everything that companies do. So what do your promotional rates look like? Are you sharing, when you do the pay equity analysis, are you sharing those results with the organization broadly? That has to be a cornerstone of everything that we're doing internally in our organizations.
Well said. All right. Julie, there is a question here about the disabled Black community and how they're often excluded from these kinds of conversations. How do you think leaders should begin to address this?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And I want to address Clara and also Margot, who is asking questions about online accessibility as well. You know, one thing for Airbnb, and there was a company called Accomable that was founded in 2015 by Shren Mattapalli and Martine Sibley. Both of them are good friends who both have spinal muscular atrophy, but they traveled all over the world together, and they were having difficulty. They were frustrated in trying to find accessible places to stay, you know. So they launched it in an effort to ensure that people with disabilities are able, like regardless of disability, you are able to find a place to stay. We later partnered with Accomable. They became a part of the Airbnb team, where Shren was leading a lot of that work around the accessibility community. You know, similar to some of the earlier comments I made in recommendations around what companies should be thinking about with product inclusion. It's, again, bringing those people not only to the table for performative reasons, but then empowering them and allowing them to lead the thing at your company. And Shren has been absolutely amazing in leading that team and that work. You know, Clara, I appreciate the comment, because I think one thing we think about, but maybe don't often talk about, is intersectionality. So you're talking about a person, I don't know, maybe could be a woman who is Black, who is disabled. You know, those are many layers that each have to be dealt with and addressed. And I appreciate that comment, but just wanted to really call out intersectionality, because that is sometimes an important piece we miss. To Margot's question around online accessibility, that is work as well that we are consulting with external partners who are well-versed in this space to ensure that we're building, you know, we're thinking through how do we build products that are accessible in an online perspective. A dear friend of mine is the lead principal attorney at Disney, and she leads online accessibility for Disney. I think about all the offerings Disney has, and WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is something that her team spends a ton of time ensuring that Disney's products are operating in tandem with WCAG. So Margot, I just want to flag, there are a lot of companies that are thinking about the accessibility community. It is something that is very important to Airbnb, and I'm sure to Twitter and the work that Kimberly is doing with Black Girls Code.
Yeah, absolutely. I am the daughter of a blind man, actually, and it is incredible what tech's done just in the last few years. Complete game changer, how much more accessible the world's become almost overnight. All right, well, all of you ladies are basically getting ready to rule the world, AKA make a new world for us. You're all building a new future for us. So I'm gonna just do one last wrap up question. And let's start with you, Kimberly. If the audience wants to get engaged tomorrow, what is the #1 nonprofit you're gonna recommend them to go to? You can say your own if you wish.
I'm like, is this a setup? Like, what would I say? Oh, yeah. Well, I have to plug BGC. Like, I cannot not say Black Girls Code. But I would also want to say that I want to see multivariate, a response to the issues that we're addressing. I think that's important. So as techies, I do consider myself a techie. I would have to, I would have to give a shout out to organizations like BGC that are doing this critical work to build the pipeline and create the technologists of tomorrow. But then also really uplift as well organizations like CPE, Center for Policing Equity, that are doing racial justice work on the ground, working with police departments, et cetera. Or looking at organizations like East Oakland Collective, that is actually on the streets every day feeding people in East Oakland. So when we look at, we had a team meeting today, and we talked about, like, we're wanting to address all the needs of our students. So it's not okay just to teach them Python. Like, are they going home to a community that is safe and not over policed? Are they going home and being able to find they have a place to live or a place to sleep? When we look at doing really deep structural change in Black and brown communities, all of these things are important. All the pieces matter, and find a way to support all of these efforts if you can.
Awesome. Jelana?
I would have to give a shout out to Code Tenderloin, which is an amazing workforce development organization that really tries to secure long-term employment for underserved communities in San Francisco. It's been one of I think one of the longest community partners that we've had at Twitter, so long-standing relationship there. And I love that they do sort of that promotion of inclusion and diversity in their lived experience, hiring, job training, et cetera. So really powerful organization. And I also love that they take to Kimberly's point around having a holistic approach and all the connections on all of the areas of disparity. I love that they partner with other organizations. And one of the organizations that they partner with is Compass Family Services that addresses homelessness. And we know in the city that that is a real issue. I recently joined the board of Compass and think they do amazing work as well. So I'm super proud of Code Tenderloin and what they're doing there. I guess I gave you two organizations in that answer, but they're both great.
All right, and lastly, real quick, Julie.
Yeah, I think I would, this is probably going to be a little off the beaten path a bit. Outside of boring loitering, but it's still fun because I love my teams. I'm a filmmaker, and I think there's a lot of power in shaping the narrative by telling stories, compelling stories that show people in different lights you probably typically wouldn't assume that they would assume. So I think there's a ton of power in storytelling. So I would support organizations that are telling those stories of marginalized communities. I work with Real Stories in Oakland, right across from the Kingston's 11. I'm very familiar. But the Real Stories group is an amazing collective of people who are telling those stories. So I would really suggest that people look out for organizations who are creating the narratives, because narratives in the past have been very harmful to underrepresented communities. So how do we tell a new story?
All right, ladies, I kept you an extra 9 minutes. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This thing's gonna be recorded, so we're gonna send it out. Share, share, share. There's some really good nuggets in here. Have a good rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.